Let's turn to a KGW Verify now, because with more troops headed to the Middle East and with this escalating violence between the U.S. and Iran, fear and confusion are basically building. And we're seeing a ton of questions on social media about the possibility of a military draft. In fact, so many people are searching for answers, they actually crashed the government's Selective Services website. It was down last night and for part of today. So on Twitter, the agency blamed the spread of misinformation. They say, don't worry, they're conducting, in that second tweet there, business as usual, and that it's up to the president and Congress to authorize a draft. So while we're on the topic, how does all that work? So first, Congress needs to pass legislation, so the president can't just declare a draft on his own. Then they do a draft lottery. A lot of us have heard about that or remember it from the Vietnam War. Now, the system for the lottery is always in place. Men must legally register for the Selective Service when they turn 18, and then their name is kept in that system until they're 25 years old. That's the age window. Interestingly, last year, a federal judge ruled that it's unconstitutional to only register men, but the Selective Service says they'll continue doing that until they get an order from Congress or a court. Now, just a few weeks ago, Oregon Congressman Peter Defazio introduced a bill to get rid of the Selective Service. And that was before, of course, the latest escalation between the U.S. and Iran and before any talk of a draft. So right now, that bill is sitting in the House Armed Services Committee. So we can verify that, yes, a draft could eventually happen, but it would take authorization from both the president and Congress. And again, right now, we are not technically at war.